Hey guys, welcome to the Smart Venture Podcast. In each episode, we're going to have conversations with some of the top investors, superstar founders, as well as well-known tech company executives in Silicon Valley. We'll have a coffee chat with them to learn their way of thinking and actionable tips on how they build or invest in a successful company. Before we start our show today, I want to make sure the listener, aka you, understand that everything a person say on the podcast only reflects hers or his own opinion, not the show or the company they work at. Our guest today is a former CEO of Dunkin Donuts. He took over as the CEO of Dunkin Donuts at age 25 from his father, who was the founder of Dunkin Donuts. In his 35 years run, he grew the company from $10 million in sales to over $2 billion, with more than 3,000 outlets. He served on the board of Domino's Pizza and Sonic Drive-In. His name is Robert Rosenberg. This episode is the first part of the conversation with Bob. We'll focus on how Bob started his career in Dunkin Donuts, and if starting all over again, what would he do to scale a business in today's environment? Welcome to the show, Bob.
My pleasure, Grace. Great to be here.
I have to say, I'm such a huge fan of Dunkin Donuts. I was always curious about how it started from one single store to how big it is today. Many people can start one donut shop, but very few can scale it up like Dunkin. And you're the person who did the scaling. To start off the show, I'd love for you to tell us the story of how Dunkin Donuts become Dunkin Donuts and how you grew from a boy working at the donut shop to a successful CEO.
Having a family business, as a lot of people who know and grow up in family businesses, it sort of preoccupies an awful lot of the dinner conversation around the dinner table. And so I grew up, sort of virtually, I would say, over the store. So my dad started right after the war. He was an eighth grade dropout out of school, but he had built a career building routes of ice cream with ice cream routes around different cities, both in New Haven and in Boston. And conversations always, and he started a business after the Second World War called Industrial Luncheon Service. And I had all different kind of jobs, and that business grew rather well. It went to almost 150 trucks and 6 depots all around New England. So from the time I was a little boy, I worked at 14 in the commissary in the kitchen. Then at 15, I was in the bakery making product that went on the trucks. And then I drove a truck and I ran stores and I cut cold cuts for the route trucks. And so every year I put in, Malcolm Gladwell wrote a book called Outliers. And in the book Outliers, he says, success sort of leaves a footprint, whether it's in any business or any kind of activity. People usually pay their apprenticeship. They apprentice. They spend what he called 10,000 hours sort of learning their trade. Mm-hmm. And I, in fact, over those years, all the way through high school and then later through college, subbing for managers who went on store vacations at Dunkin Donuts, mm-hmm. I basically learned my trade. And when the time came later, which is your question, mm-hmm. what happened at age 25? I basically at least knew a little bit about the industry I was going to join, which I think is a key element. I'm kind of an 80-20 guy, 80% of the time. Not always, but that sort of leads to success. Well, in this case, knowing your trade, I think, is important. As I taught in graduate school, that was one of the lessons I would impart to students in terms of those considering entrepreneurship. Know your trade, know your industry, spend 3 to 5 years in your industry before you embark on an entrepreneur or buy a franchise, which is another way to shorten those 10,000 hours.
Absolutely. Curious about from this 10,000 hours, what were the technical skills you picked up and what were the soft skills you were intentionally trying to acquire?
Good question. The technical skills, I wouldn't want your audience to believe for a second that at 25 that I had the kind of maturity, and as we go through my career, I think it'll become kind of obvious, that in today's language, the emotional intelligence of knowing myself and knowing others well. But I was fortunate in the fact that while I was in business school, in my second year of business school, I took two courses that were very helpful to me. One was strategy from a guy by the name of Cy Tillis. And Cy was one of the founders of the Boston Consulting Group. And this is back in 1962, maybe. So that's a long time ago, before it was much in vogue. And I also took a course in retailing from a professor by the name of Walter Salmon. And in the course of retailing, I used to have to write papers in my second year of business school on different issues. And I used the company, my father's company, sort of as a subject matter. And I used Cy Tillis's concept of strategy, the language of strategy, the importance of strategy, and looking at the business. And as I looked at the business, it came pretty clear to me that maybe what the company was suffering from, and it was suffering, was what I would call indigestion, that a small company can die of starvation and not enough capital, not enough talent. But it can also die from indigestion, too much on its plate, too many things. And my dad had a partner, my uncle. Mm-hmm. My uncle and my father were partners up until 1955. And they didn't get along. And my father bought my uncle out. And my uncle, at that time, we really had 5 Dunkin Donut shops. And we had all of these trucks and some cafeterias, but pretty much focused on those two different parts of the food service business. My uncle took the money and started a competitive chain called Mr. Donut.
Mr. Donut.
So you can just imagine the dinner conversations. So it was not only a fight and a competition about who is going to be better and bigger and win the acknowledgement of the world in terms of who created this. I mean, it was intense. And my father, while I was away in college, then the Army, and then graduate school, had begun to start to spin up a number of different businesses. So by the time I came back in 1963, and I had written my papers in 1961 and 62, basically there were 8 little businesses. There was a cafeteria company, a vending machine company, a pancake house. There were 15 or 20 hamburger stands. There was a delicatessen. We had an investment in something called a Leaning Tower of Pizza. We were in all different kind of businesses. My uncle, unencumbered by all those businesses, just focused on Mr. Donut, was overtaking us. So when I got there, there were 100 Dunkins and 80 Mr. Donut stores, and my father was pulling his hair out. And he was trying to sell the business. He couldn't stand the fact that he wasn't able to compete. Profits had stagnated around $100,000, and he couldn't sell the business for what he wanted from it. So that was the scene that it came to. But luckily, to answer your question, what skills that I have? I had an understanding of strategy, and I had the ability to recruit out of business school some of my classmates that had gone to work right after school for Goldman Sachs, and I was able to lift them. In those years, nobody went into the restaurant business. It wasn't considered to be a very fashionable industry. So everybody went to work for either McKinsey or a consulting company or a banking firm like Goldman. So my friends had gone to Goldman, and over time I started to lift them out. So fundamentally, and as I later reflect on what does it take to be successful, if the strategy isn't right and the organization isn't right, there's damn else little you can do to create success. And because of happenstance, because of my training in business school, at least I could focus on those two things. Now, that notwithstanding, the fact of the matter, I was still 25 or 26, a cocky kid, fresh out of business school. And I didn't know what I didn't know. And then I paid a fearful price. The first 5 years were incredibly successful, operating with this very focus. We sort of brushed and burnished this diamond in the rough among the 8 businesses, this Dunkin' Donut, which had been a lot of different diner kind of operations. They were selling all different kinds of foods, the scrambled eggs in the morning, hot dogs and hamburgers. And basically we standardized it and we focused on certain markets. So we niched down in today's language. And that was very successful, only then to lose my way and begin to start to spin out of control in the next 5-year era. And that's when I began to acquire some of the emotional and soft skills that you mentioned, as I started to come to realize who I was, where my strengths were, where my weaknesses were, what was the necessity of having to complement the team.
What do you think was your strengths or weaknesses, and what were you looking for in your partners?
My strengths and weaknesses. One of my weaknesses is I'm impetuous. That's a bad thing to be when you're a CEO. So you have to make sure you create enough mechanisms around you to stop that, or at least slow it down. Mm-hmm. So some of my strengths were I'm thrown as a person normally to be collaborative and collegial. I am not a command and control person. I was never comfortable in that kind of role. I never saw myself as someone on a white horse riding in to save the day. That was not who I am. That's not how I operated. I like team sports. Basically, I think I just was thrown that way, and that's my personality. So that would be, I think a strength. And it may not necessarily be a strength on all occasions, but for that setting and for that job, it was kind of a fit. The other thing I would say is I'm persistent. Early in my life, I had suffered some setbacks, no major setbacks, but I didn't get into the college of my choice initially. And I went to my second choice. And it was one of the best things that had ever happened to me because I just sort of blossomed. And then I ultimately transferred to the school of my choice. And because of the fact that I had such good grades as a freshman, and I had accomplished, I was president of the largest residential hall in the country. And that enabled me to get into the business school of my choice. So in other words, out of lemons came lemonade. And I had a couple of experiences like that early in my life that sort of indicated to me, if you just keep going, you can work things out. So I guess I came with a streak of persistence, and 35 years in a job sort of indicates I'm pretty persistent. Mm-hmm. And the last thing I would think, well, maybe not the last thing, but another characteristic that I came with is I was competitive and aspirational. I like to win. I like competition, and not within the business, but outside competition. I like my competitors. I didn't hate them. I learned a lot from them. But I as a team, we love to win. That was sort of a characteristic. And as far as weaknesses, I'd say that my biggest weakness is impetuosity. I tend to respond early and quick, and I need to be more thoughtful. And the complementarity of the team. I mean, basically, I believe business really is a team activity, and it really is not one person. When you lift back the curtain, if you find any success in a family, a community, a country, you'll generally find a bunch of people that respect each other, no backbiting, that sort of share a common set of values and beliefs and aspirations. And we did as a team. We were together for a very long period of time. But early on, that was a huge help. And those were my best, my board, my direct reports. They were the best people to help me, to keep me straight, to give me the best ideas, to bring expertise and competence in marketing, purchasing, and other things that we got good at. They were not coming from me. They were coming from teammates. And there was no big shame in acknowledging that you weren't the smartest guy in the room and had all the ideas, and that wasn't prized. What was prized was the team and the fact that we all supported each other. And I don't want to get corny, but there's an element of love and respect for each other that I think really was the glue that held us together.
When you were growing up, do you consider your dad as one of the most successful businessmen? Do you think that gives you an edge to have the confidence to pursue something you want to do? You seem super confident about your ability to get a good education. You went to Cornell and Harvard, and you're very competitive in business. Was that because of your family is successful in a way, so you didn't have the financial stress? Do you think that plays into your success?
Yes and no. My dad was my biggest booster. So in Boston, there's this thing called Boston Latin School, which you have to apply to as a kid. Mm-hmm. And I applied and got in. And I had a little bit of trouble. You have to study Latin for 4 years, and German, you have to take a number of courses. Very rigorous classical education. It was the first high school in the United States. So it's a big feather. And every month would be a grading period. And I knew, and that you would get certain grades. So when I first moved from the inner city, because we were dirt poor, we were not rich people. We were dirt poor. We lived with grandparents early on And then we were living in a section of Boston called Roxbury. And when I was going to Latin school, Roxbury is a tough section of Boston. So I was aware of the fact that my father would carry around my cards that I would get my marking periods and brag to his friends that his son got an approbation that month or an approbation with distinction, which was the highest grade you could get from Boston Latin School. Mm-hmm. And that was motivation. And I idealized my father. I idolized him. He was bigger than life. He was a big guy, but 8th grade education. And he had kind of a love-hate relationship with education. He wanted me to get a great education and pushed me to get a great education. And I wanted to please him. But as I came to realize later, he also had a desire, because he was a competitive guy, that he wanted to be better and smarter than all those book-learned guys. So it isn't quite so simple as you describe it. It's not black or white. It's more gray. And so there were tensions all the way through with my dad. And I also came to know, the fact of the matter is he picked the right industry. He picked a great business. He's the founder. And I came to realize very quickly, without a founder, there is no business. So he's always to be honored and revered as a founder. But by the same token, as you go to change the business, as I did from Universal Food Systems to Dunkin Donuts, and in order to keep it from being sold, there was tension. He always wanted to cash in. He never had any money. We were very poor. And he was trying to sell. I was trying to run it. And with one hand, I'm trying to run the business and hold him in. And on the other hand, I'm fighting Mr. Donut for who's going to be the biggest and best donut company in the world. So there were tensions that happened. And I'm sure they happen in all family businesses. And by the time we went public in 1968, 5 years later, Universal Food Systems had disappeared. We had sold off the businesses, really throttled them back, and we went public as Dunkin Donuts. So we not only changed the strategy, changed the organization from what he had, but also changed the very name of the company from Universal Food Systems to Dunkin Donuts. Now those create their own tensions too, as from one generation to the next that you have to change changes in order to survive and adapt.
I feel like if there's no Mr. Donut, would it be lack of competition for Dunkin'? So you'll be less willing to win? From an outsider perspective, I feel like it motivates Dunkin' to be bigger and faster.
Absolutely. It was the juice in our tank. It was the gas in our tank. No question. And some of the things I did were dumb. I heard that they were going to go overseas, and my father wanted a trade mission, to England and to Germany. And they never opened up, and we did, and I lost money because it was way premature. So, and then they opened in Japan. We then followed them there. So, yeah, the answer to your question is that, yes, it provided a lot of impetus for a lot of what we did, and it did make us better, and it improved our game. And my cousin was running, who was also my counselor at camp, 3 years older than I, and someone I looked up to was running our competitor, Mr. Donut. So it was not like my uncle, my cousin, and I was sort of an usher at their wedding between my cousin and her husband, who was running the business. So it was kind of a very intertwined and complicated relationship.
Yeah, imagine like any holiday. I would say it would be a really interesting conversation.
At a table, yeah. Well, but we were not celebrating big holidays together as we once had. The family has, but it's now been put back together. But for a number of years, it was so intense and so difficult that it did break up the big family dinners at major holiday times when we used to all get together. People took sides and everybody went to their respective corners.
People took sides, really?
Oh, yeah. I don't know.
One thing I find super interesting about Dunkin' Donuts and Mr. Donut is both brands started at almost the same time by similar people. I remember at one point you recruited a marketing guy from Mr. Donut. In a way, both companies are very successful. Of course, Dunkin' is more successful. What have Dunkin' done right to win the battle?
Basically, we had similar store designs. We had similar configurations. We had similar menus, similar pricing. Products were quite similar. I think the distinction was between strategy and organization. I think that's what spelled the day. Ultimately, in 1990, we bought Mr. Donut and rebadged them to Dunkin'. We bought 500 and some odd U.S. operations and rebranded them. But the difference was between ourselves and Mr. Donut. One of the things when we were niching down and we were burnishing this diamond in the rough, we also decided that we were going to open up as part of our planning strategy, that we were going to open up in specific marketing areas. And at the time, there were 300 SMSAs in the United States, statistical marketing areas. And we were going to open up in those where we could build our brand, build distribution. So if you happened to be in San Francisco and you wanted to open a Dunkin' shop, we would say, thank you very much, but right now we're not going to California. We are basically operating in these 20 different markets that we're building our brand because we thought ultimately brand had value. And Mr., I think during that same time as I saw it, were not that disciplined in terms of where their new distribution was, and they were going where everybody wanted to buy a franchise. Therefore, they couldn't support it operationally. They couldn't support it in terms of marketing. And that began to be the distinction between us and them. And so at the end of the 5-year time period between 63 and 68, we went public, and we were the darling of Wall Street, selling at 60 times earnings. They, in fact, sold to a milling company, International Multifoods, for about $6 million. And the war was over within 5 years. And I was at least the first era of that war. It went on again when they got a new CEO. But fundamentally, I thought the difference really was between strategy, particularly new distribution strategy. Mm-hmm. That was one of the levers, the 4 levers we pulled in order to be distinguishable, and organization. I think those were the two characteristics that separated us, that allowed us, and we called it the Donut Awards because they really were Donut Awards. As silly as that sounds, that was true. In our world, that was the only war that really made sense. I mean, other wars were all around the world, but that was the war we were focused on, and we did win it at the end of 68, and that was a big victory. But then it set me up for a real big failure. So you might want to touch on that, because there's a lot to learn from that as well, too.
You mentioned that you were strategically positioning Dunkin' Donuts in 20-something cities. How did you pick the 20 cities? Why not San Francisco? How did you come up with the strategy? Was it because of you want people to see Dunkin' at every corner? Just curious, what's the reason behind it?
It was a belief that it required 2 things to build a brand. It required distribution, which meant points of outlet, and it also required ad weight. Every franchise store, by contract in those early years, was required to pay 2% of their sales into an ad fund. And in those days, we weren't large enough to afford national advertising. All we could afford would be market by market advertising, newspaper, even TV spots. There was no internet. So, it was a different world 60 years ago. It was very different. And so our thinking was that if we put the stores together, we would build the value of the brand. We could advertise it. We could also have strong owners, because unfortunately, or the way the world works, things are going to open in a bell-shaped curve. Some are going to be a bottom third, mid-third, and the upper third. And those stronger operators that existed in the market would be available to buy stores from other owners who might not be quite as well suited for the business. It was a hard business. We manufactured all product on premise. It was a hard business. We were open a lot of hours. We weren't in every part of the day part. I mean, we were a little bit like a bumblebee. A bumblebee isn't designed to fly, but somehow it finds a way to fly. I mean, it's big and fat, and it's got little wings. And in a way, if you look at McDonald's, they're in breakfast, lunch, dinner, midday breaks, night, all. We basically were in snacks and breakfast, which comprised about 20% of the away-from-home food market. Plus, we had a bakery product for people to take home in dozens throughout the day or at night or on Sunday mornings after church. So we had to be very crisp about what we did and how we went about it. We had to be very careful.
Compared to starting and scaling Dunkin' Donuts today to back in time, what would you say were some of the fundamental strategies that you use? What would be 3 things that come on top of your head when it comes to developing a strategy for a business like Dunkin'? If you and I are starting a business today, how should we come up with a unique product and strategy for it?
Fundamentally, my belief is, and the whole company's belief was, that the very reason for your existence was to be able to satisfy a need among the consumers better than anyone else. Mm-hmm. And we were the first company to make coffee the centerpiece of our business. Now, most people today would be astounded when I tell you that the average consumption of coffee after the Second World War to the year 2000 had fallen in half from 40 gallons per capita to 20 gallons per capita, because the coffee product that was being sold through supermarkets was not very good. It was poor product, and colas were taking a huge chunk of that. Today, when we have so many coffee houses and specialty coffees, it's hard for people to understand that. But years ago, we were competing against Nescafe, which was an instant coffee, which I don't even think is still on the market. Maxwell House was Robusta beans. So we were sourcing the highest, and this was, my father was a nut about quality, and he wanted to provide the very best possible product. So if you're going to make a business and you're going to try to satisfy a need, you got to find a way. In our case, it was to make the very best possible product qualities in the narrow niches that we were going to do our business, the best coffee. So we sourced the best beans. We brewed it the richest. We used only pure 18% cream. We were fastidious about it. We ground it in front of the customer. We would throw the coffee away, and we had 60-ounce pots. If it sat for more than 18 minutes, we would throw the coffee away. I mean, we really were committed to being different than everybody else, that we were going to be better. The only place you could probably get anything even remotely like a Dunkin' Donut cup of coffee back in the 60s, 70s, and 80s was if you went to a high-end restaurant and you had it after dinner. Maybe you'd be lucky enough to be able to get that kind of product. So it wasn't available everywhere else. So we were providing and filling a need no one else filled. And that was true of each product that we tried to introduce. And slowly over time and the change in our service delivery system, the beverages kept becoming a larger and larger part of our mix. So to the point where, basically we are, primarily a beverage company with a lot of ancillary products that go along with it, a lot of bakery products and snack products, so that we can satisfy people's needs throughout the day. But the company is still committed to the same notion of whatever we sell, it's got to be better in some way. Package better, advertise better, price better, quality better, and try to fill every niche. It's sort of a full court press on every product. So the question you asked is if you and I were going to go into business and try to start a business, we would look for what we knew that our business fit that niche better than anybody else. That would be my first rule of thumb. And that comes back to the 10,000 hours. It's hard to know what exists in the marketplace and where the openings are, where the niches are, unless you know your business, unless you're in that business. And that's why franchising is such a terrific opportunity, because it telescopes all of that that 5 years of apprenticeship into a matter of weeks to learn the business with the help of a company that's gone through all of those trials and errors before. But that's how, if I were to start a business or I were to look to make an investment, my first question, what is this company's sustainable advantage? And I look at the market and how does it satisfy it better than anyone else?
I'm taking notes. Those are great points. To sum up, we should focus on two things. One is always trying our best to satisfy the consumer's needs. Think from the consumer's perspective, study what do they buy, how do they buy it, then create good marketing strategy or distribution channel based on their needs. Then the second point is be unique, be better than your competitions.
You look at the whole marketing mix. As you just did, you just started to go through each of them. And, in our industry, it has historically been convenience and value that have driven the industry. Basically the tailwind for this industry was women entering the workforce. After the Second World War, 1 out of 3 women worked outside the home. Now it's 2 out of 3, or maybe even higher than that. And they had to substitute what they had been preparing in home meals now with other food products. And that was the sort of the driving force, the major mega trend that drove the whole restaurant industry and the quick service restaurant industry, the QSR industry after the war. We had this huge tailwind of demand. And so when you start to look at convenience could be, mobile ordering. It could be pickup. It could be online ordering. In other words, to provide as many platforms as possible. However the consumer wants to buy, you have to be there in order to satisfy them. In terms of value today is not only price, not only product quality, not only packaging, not only advertising, brand, very valuable, but it may well be to ESG. It may well be environmental, social, and governance. It may be people's concerns about disposable cups. They don't want styrofoam anymore. They want to buy from companies that subscribe to their values and about preserving the environment. And when you start to watch them spend their dollars that way, boy, you better be quick on the mark to be able to give them what they want. They don't want straws that are going to be plastic, that are going to foul the oceans. They're going to want biodegradable. And if that's what they want, that's your job to get there quicker than the other guy and to make sure you meet that need. And when you've got enough units, you can test it. You can see by keeping all things the same and then changing the variable, how much it's a nice to have versus an essential. How important is it really to the customer? Because, you say before you make a big move for a big chain, you got to quantify it. You can't ask everybody to follow you, because you wake up one morning and you got a great idea, and therefore everybody got to do it, which is the way I used to do it as a kid. That was what I learned. I was very intuitive, and unfortunately, intuition is nothing more than a lot of experience and making a lot of mistakes. And at 25, you can't be very intuitive because you haven't had enough time, enough miles on those wheels. So anyways, that's how you keep a keen eye on the customer, and they're constantly changing. That's why in the book I have 6 eras. Some as low as 3 years, some as long as 8 years, because the technology is changing, the customer is changing, the competition is changing, and if you don't have new responses, you're basically going to be old news, and that's not good news. It's to be old news, and so we had to change along with it.
Yeah, so basically be faster than your competitors, testing the idea before going into a broader market.
And be prepared to stop, because not every idea resonates. And you try a lot of things, and you're sort of building shade trees for the future. Some of it works, some of it doesn't. And you have to be prepared. So if people begin to trust you, based upon your reliability and your competence. Now, competence is not the same as never making a mistake, because if that were the case, I wouldn't have lasted 2 seconds. Made lots of mistakes, but not on the big promises. After we found out what the error of our ways was in the second era, is basically we tried a lot of things. Some of it didn't work. My impetuosity, for example, I'll give you a good example. Back in the 1970s, Morton's, which may not even be a brand today, but it was a huge frozen food brand, introduced frozen donuts, jelly donuts, and honey dip donuts and packaged goods, and sold in supermarkets. It was a huge success. They were flying out the door. And as a result of that, I bought a plant from Dole in Huston, Delaware, to make frozen donuts because I was concerned they're going to outflank us. Well, as it turned out, it wasn't a trend. It was a fad. It came and went. It got the award for the best new packaged goods product, consumer packaged goods product in a decade. But it didn't last. It was a one-time purchase, didn't meet the needs, product quality didn't meet it. But I was quick to the gun. So that's a mistake I made. I moved too quickly on the basis of a fad, not a trend. But the fact of the matter is that we were still providing wonderful product to the customers, delivering to the stockholders our promise in terms of our growth and earnings per share, and our franchise owners in terms of return on investment, in terms of their business. So the big things we got right, but in between, a lot of things that we tried didn't work.
I think you mentioned such a good point about getting the bigger things right. Do you think the rule of thumb for an entrepreneur should be always adapting faster than your competitor? Or should it be taking your time to prepare, testing things out in a smaller market before you expand? Say you and I are starting a coffee shop today. We see a huge trend of people purchasing coffee directly online. Would you recommend me to instantly develop or trying to sell product over the internet? Or should we wait until our competitors testing things out on their expense so we could watch and learn?
I would say there are differences. I would say when starting a business new, it's an emphasis on a couple of things you have to have. I think you have to know your industry. I think you have to have enough capital to be able to get through the first few tries, because it doesn't always, most times it doesn't work out as you can envision it. So you've got to reposition it a couple of times and have some people around you that complement your skills as a team. Those are the three must-haves. So if I was starting a business, I would be fully prepared to be nimble and agile and not be wedded to a slow but short technique. That's different if you're a large public company and you've got thousands of franchisees and you're all over the world. You can't lead people like that. But you have to be, when you're starting out as an entrepreneur, you've got to be awfully nimble. My experience at Dunkin' Donuts didn't start as Dunkin' Donuts. Dunkin' Donuts started as an open kettle, and it didn't work. And because of serendipity and chance, it got repositioned because a competitor was going to open across the street, and the partners fixed it. And then my father hired this executive vice president who lost confidence in the donut business, and he started to put in scrambled eggs and hot dogs and hamburgers. And I came along and went back to the original version of what we had. So there you go. We had three different starts. Really lucky we had the capital and we had the right people at the right time to save it. But most things don't start flying out the gate right. You have an idea. It's something that you believe in. It meets your needs. Oftentimes, that's what most entrepreneurs say. I have this need. They don't have the money to do the research for the whole world to figure out if everybody else has that need, but they have this need. This is important to me, and I think it might be important to a lot of other people who think like me, who are millennials or whatever, and whatever generation you represent, in terms of that's what I need. But be prepared to be able to be very nimble. So I wouldn't say go slow then. I would say go fast. Be prepared to make adaptations and have enough capital so you can try it twice or three times sometimes before you get it rolling right. But that's different than running a big or larger company. So what we did when we were small and what we did when we were larger were different. And that's why oftentimes you find that it's hard for somebody to last 35 years in the business, and why it's 6 eras, because each is different and requires different responses and different kinds of ideas in order to meet the needs. Really a startup is a lot different than a large company.
Yeah, I love what you said about in different stages of a company, there should be different strategies on moving things forward. That's super insightful. Let's talk about competition. On one interview, you mentioned that you don't see Starbucks as a competitor. In another interview, you mentioned that you started the International Donut Association. You become good friends with Tim Horton. Besides Mr. Donut, who do you view as your direct competitor, and what was your strategy on winning the game?
Mr. Donut is no longer, now as part of Dunkin'. We have converted all of Mr. Donut to Dunkin'. But initially, I also want to revisit Starbucks. Starbucks apparently got started in the 70s, but it really didn't show up on my radar until 1991 or 2, I think. And basically, I saw that as a third place and not in the quick service restaurant industry. It was much more a place where people could hang out between work and home as a third place to work on their computers or to socialize. And it was a foreign product in terms of being imported from Italy with all of the nomenclature, the pricing points. It was different. Today, the businesses are each bumping up to each other. Now, Starbucks is now going to start to go into the suburbs and go through drive-through windows. And they've got a brand of Americana coffee every day that competes with Dunkin's coffee. Dunkin' has now got lattes and other beverages that are starting to compete. So what was back in my day in the 90s and what is today and 2 decades later is somewhat different. So they are competitors, as is McDonald's a competitor. So I would say the Dunkin's competitors are basically McDonald's and Starbucks. And a lot of convenience store chains in the market. Coffee is a very habitual product, and so I don't know if maybe I've lost the train of thought, but in terms of answering your question, did that get to the root of it?
If you're running Dunkin' Donuts today, what's your strategy to compete with Starbucks and McDonald's?
Better locations, better advertising, better value, better convenience. and an array of products that meet the consumer's needs. And it's the same things that always existed. If in fact consumers are more interested today in ESG, environment, social, and governance than they used to be, beating them to the punch of that. It's a full court press. It's trying to fill every niche in the consumer's minds better than the competition. So you make it more convenient by better locations. You make it more convenient by providing the ability for them to access the brand every which way they want to buy it. They want to buy it through drive-through windows. They want to buy it through home delivery. Do they want to buy it through office delivery? However they want it, it's our job to get it to them better and faster than the competition. Not faster, but better. Whatever that means to the customer. And that gets to be harder and harder all the time. And it becomes more and more demanding and challenging to be able to fill the customer's desires and needs because the competition is better. The competition is stronger. You have to raise your game. It makes you continually have to strive to be better at doing that. And I see the company do that. I mean, I marvel at the company. I marvel at not only our company, but other QSR companies and how they pivoted early and made huge investments in digitization. They saw it coming. There were different waves in the industry. The first was operations, great stores, my dad's era. Then came consumer goods, packaged goods marketing on top of that. Be really good at that. Those are the next group that kept the strong operations, added on and grafted on great consumer packaged goods marketing, the kind of thing we talked about with the SMSAs and ad weights and all of that. And now those companies that grafted on, kept those other two, and now grafted on digitization and the ability to understand social network and clubs where people have loyalty clubs and constant communication, consumer relationship marketing, so you know what they bought, when they bought it, how they like it. I mean, all of those become touch points for the customer better and better, and that can only happen, I think, through digitization. And those companies that made that investment, I think, are going to come through the pandemic, are not only going to survive, I think they're going to thrive. So, but that becomes the battlefield. All three of those things, you have to be better than your competition in order to come out on top. And it's a I keep using the same language, but it is in basketball in terms of a full court press that you never can light up. And you got to watch each of those elements and be better than the competition.
All right. That's all we have for today. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Smart Venture Podcast. In the next episode, we'll learn more about how Bob successfully scaled Dunkin Donuts to a global brand. Don't forget to come back on Wednesday for the second part of the conversation with Bob. If you like it, please leave us a quick review and hit subscribe so you don't miss any tips from the experts. If you want to receive our updates, please leave your email at smartventurepod.com. If you want to connect with me, all my socials are at Grace Gong GG. Beside LinkedIn, it's just Grace Gong. I'd love to connect with you and let me know your thought about the show. Now you can also listen to Smart Venture Podcast on YouTube. Go to smartventurepod.com. Click the YouTube link on the top banner. Don't forget to hit subscribe and smash the like button. See you next time.